It was a hot, dry day in the vast desert, the kind of day that felt like the sun was burning everything it touched. Jake Thompson, a seasoned cowboy, rode slowly through the rough landscape, his horse's hooves kicking up clouds of dust. His worn hat shaded his face, and his leather vest creaked with every movement as he adjusted the reins. He was used to the heat. The wild frontier had been his home for years, ever since he left the noisy towns and cities behind to live a quieter life. Jake wasn't in any hurry. He had a small herd of cattle grazing somewhere off in the distance, but he liked to ride out alone, checking the land, making sure no predators or troublemakers were nearby. He loved the solitude, the freedom that came with it. The desert stretched out before him like an endless sea, and the only sounds were the rustling of the wind through the dry brush and the occasional call of a distant bird. As he rode on, his sharp eyes scanned the horizon. It wasn't just the cattle that he kept an eye on in this wild land. There were plenty of dangers in the desert, both human and animal, and not all of them were easy to spot. But Jake had learned how to survive out here, how to read the land and understand what it was telling him. Suddenly his gaze caught something, movement, fast and frantic, up ahead. His heart skipped a beat as he turned his horse toward the sound. He rode closer, the excitement starting to build. As he neared, he could make out figures moving quickly through the desert. A group of men on horseback, riding hard and looking like they were in the middle of something serious. Jake didn't need to get any closer to know this wasn't a friendly group of travelers. The way they were moving, the way they looked, it was the unmistakable sign of an Apache war party. Jake had seen them before, and he knew enough about their ways to understand that they didn't take kindly to strangers, especially not those who weren't from their tribe. He slowed his horse, trying to stay out of sight, keeping to the shadows of the rocks and hills. From his hidden spot, Jake watched the scene unfold. The Apache riders were circling around something, their horses kicking up dust as they shouted to one another in their native language. It didn't take long for Jake to realize what was happening. The Apache were chasing someone who was running for his life. Through the haze of dust and chaos, Jake could see a young boy, probably no more than 15 years old, running desperately across the desert, trying to escape the Apache riders who were gaining on him fast. The boy's clothes were torn and his face was filled with fear. His footfalls were heavy, and every few steps he stumbled as if he didn't have the strength to keep going. Jake's heart went out to the boy. He didn't know what had happened. Maybe the boy had broken some kind of tribal law or had run from a rival tribe. But Jake knew one thing for sure. The Apache weren't going to show mercy. If they caught him, the boy wouldn't survive the day. Jake's hand moved instinctively to his side where his rifle was slung over his shoulder. He didn't hesitate. He knew what he had to do. He had fought in enough skirmishes and seen enough violence in his time on the frontier to understand the stakes. The boy had no chance on his own, but Jake had a chance to make a difference. He could save him. With his heart pounding, Jake spurred his horse forward, moving faster than he had ever ridden before. He knew he didn't have much time. The Apache were closing in on the boy, and if Jake didn't act quickly, it would be too late. The sound of his horse's hooves pounding on the dirt echoed in his ears as he rushed toward the scene. The Apache riders didn't notice him at first, too focused on their pursuit of the boy. Jake's horse was fast, and within moments he was nearly on top of them. Without a second thought, Jake raised his rifle and aimed it at the closest Apache rider. The shot rang out loud and sharp, cutting through the air like a crack of thunder. The Apache rider fell from his horse, the sound of his body hitting the ground muffled by the desert's vastness. The others, startled by the sudden noise, quickly turned to face the new threat. But Jake didn't give them time to react. He fired again, taking down another rider before the Apache could make sense of what was happening. The remaining Apache riders hesitated, their horses rearing up in confusion. Jake knew they wouldn't back down easily, but he had the element of surprise on his side. The boy, hearing the gunshots, turned and saw Jake coming toward him. His eyes were wide with fear, but there was a spark of hope in them now, a small glimmer of something that Jake recognized. The cowboy kicked his horse into a faster gallop, closing the gap between him and the boy. As he reached him, Jake reached down and grabbed the boy by the arm, yanking him up onto his horse behind him. The boy didn't resist. He was too tired, too scared to do anything but hold on tight. As Jake turned his horse sharply, the remaining Apache riders let out angry shouts and rode after them. But Jake was faster. With a few more shots, he sent the Apache scattering, their pursuit slowing as they realized they were outmatched. They retreated, unwilling to risk a fight they couldn't win. Jake didn't slow down until he was sure they were out of danger. He guided his horse toward a small outcrop of rocks and halted. The boy slid off the horse, exhausted, his face pale with fear and fatigue. Jake dismounted as well, keeping his rifle close, his eyes scanning the desert for any sign of more Apache riders. For now, they were safe. The boy, still breathing heavily, looked up at Jake with wide, grateful eyes. Jake offered him a tired smile, nodding. "You're safe now," he said simply, his voice low but steady. "But you need to rest, and you need to tell me who you are." The boy nodded, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He spoke in broken English, his voice trembling. I am Koa. I'm Apache, but I..." He stopped, looking down at the ground, unsure how to explain himself. Jake could see that the boy was frightened, his mind racing with thoughts of what would happen next. He wasn't sure if the boy had been part of a raid or if something had gone terribly wrong within his tribe. But one thing was clear. Koa had no place to go now. His own people had nearly killed him, and Jake wasn't about to turn his back on him. "Don't worry," Jake said, his tone softer now. "You're with me. I'll get you to safety." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the desert seemed to grow quieter. Jake and Koa sat by the rocks, the sound of the wind and distant birds the only company. In that moment, Jake knew that the adventure wasn't over. It had only just begun. The next morning, Jake led his horse along the rocky path, with Koa riding quietly behind him. The boy was still weak from the night before, but the promise of safety had steadied his resolve. They made their way across the desert, heading toward a hidden valley that Jake had visited a few times in the past. It wasn't a place that many knew about, and it was far enough from the Apache tribe's main camp to offer some peace. Jake had a small cabin there, a place to rest and regroup when things got too dangerous on the open frontier. It wasn't much, but it was safe. As they traveled, Jake glanced at Koa, wondering what the boy's story was. He had saved the boy's life without knowing who he was or what had caused the situation. Now, however, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the boy's history pressing on him. Koa had no family left to turn to, and that left Jake to figure out what to do next. By midday, they reached the valley. It was a place of quiet beauty, hidden between two high cliffs where the wind felt softer and the air a little cooler. Jake tied his horse to a post outside the cabin and helped Koa off his horse. The boy was shaky, his legs still weak, but he followed Jake's lead into the cabin without a word. Once inside, Jake made a simple meal, some beans, dried meat, and a few biscuits. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The boy ate in silence, his eyes darting around the room, taking in everything with a mix of curiosity and caution. He seemed to be wondering what would happen next. What kind of fate awaited him now that he was in the hands of this stranger? But there was also a flicker of something else in his eyes. Hope, maybe. Jake could see that the boy was trying to understand the strange kindness that had been shown to him. The meal passed quietly, with Jake occasionally glancing at Koa, wondering if the boy would speak up. It wasn't until the last of the food had been eaten that Koa finally looked up from his plate and spoke. "You saved me," he said, his voice quiet but filled with gratitude. "Why?" Jake leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. He didn't answer right away. It wasn't that he didn't have an answer. It was just that the question caught him off guard. Why had he done it? Maybe it was the cowboy's code to help those in need. Or maybe it was just a feeling that had stirred deep within him when he saw the boy running for his life. "I don't know," Jake said finally, with a shrug. "Maybe I just couldn't leave you to die out there." Koa nodded, but his eyes were still filled with uncertainty. "You're not scared of us?" he asked. "Of my people?" Jake thought about it for a moment. He had been around the Apache before, and he knew they were a fierce and proud people, but he also knew that they were no different from anyone else. They had their traditions, their ways, just like anyone else, and in his heart, Jake couldn't believe that every Apache was someone to fear. "No," Jake said, his voice steady. "I'm not scared. I've seen my share of trouble on this land, but I know that everyone has their story. Sometimes people just need a little help." The boy seemed to consider this for a moment as if the idea was a new one. He had lived a life that had taught him to distrust outsiders, to see everyone as a potential enemy. But now, sitting in the warmth of this cabin, with a meal in his stomach and the weight of danger behind him, Koa's world was beginning to shift. It wasn't long before the quiet of the cabin was interrupted by the sound of a horse approaching. The sound of hooves echoed across the valley, and Jake immediately stood up, his instincts sharp. He reached for his rifle, which was always within arm's reach, and moved cautiously to the window. He peeked outside and saw a lone figure on horseback making its way toward the cabin. Jake's hand rested on the rifle, but he didn't raise it yet. Whoever this was, they weren't trying to sneak up on him. The rider approached slowly, and Jake could tell that they weren't hostile. He waited until the figure was close enough to see more clearly. An Apache man, tall and strong, dressed in the traditional clothing of his people. His face was weathered, but his expression was calm, even respectful. As the man came to a stop in front of the cabin, Jake lowered his rifle and stepped outside. Koa was still inside, looking out the window with wide eyes, unsure of who this new visitor was. Jake tipped his hat to the Apache rider. "Can I help you?" he asked. The man dismounted and walked toward Jake, his movements purposeful but not aggressive. "I have come to speak with the one who saved my son." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't realized that the boy he had saved was the son of an Apache chief, but it made sense now. The boy's fear, his hesitation, all pointed to a life of hardship and danger, one that only a chief's son could face. The man before him was likely none other than Chief Tahoma himself, a respected leader of the Apache tribe. "I'm Jake Thompson," the cowboy said, his voice steady but respectful. "I'm the one who helped your son?" Chief Tahoma nodded, his eyes scanning Jake with a mixture of curiosity and understanding. "You risked your life for Koa. This is not something I take lightly." Jake nodded. "It wasn't much. The boy needed help and I couldn't leave him behind." The chief regarded Jake for a moment longer, then spoke again. "You saved his life. For this I owe you a debt I will repay." Jake felt a sense of unease wash over him. He had no intention of asking for anything in return. He had simply done what he thought was right. But the Apache people had their ways, and he knew that their culture held deep respect for such acts of bravery. "There's no need," Jake said, stepping back slightly. "I did what anyone would have done." Chief Tahoma's expression softened, but his eyes were still intense. "In my tribe, we believe in honoring those who show courage and kindness. I offer you a reward for your actions. You will not leave here empty-handed." Jake tried to protest, but the chief cut him off. "The reward is mine to offer. I am a man of my word." Then the chief did something that stunned Jake. "I offer you my daughter Naheli in marriage, as a token of my gratitude for saving Koa's life." Jake's mind raced. The words didn't make sense at first. Marriage? The chief was offering his daughter as a reward? He had expected perhaps some material gift or a promise of help. But this was something else entirely. I don't know what to say," Jake stammered, caught off guard by the unexpected offer. "I didn't do this for any reward. I didn't even know Koa was your son." Chief Tahoma's eyes locked onto Jake's. "It matters not. You have done something that very few would do. In my culture, this is how we honor such acts. You are a brave man and you deserve my gratitude. Nahele will honor your bravery." Jake felt a heavy weight settle on his chest. He wasn't sure what to do with this offer. Marriage? To a woman he had never met? The idea seemed impossible, yet the chief's sincerity was undeniable. "I need to think about this," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is unexpected," the chief nodded. "Take your time, Jake Thompson. But know this, my offer is made with the deepest respect. You have saved my son's life. I will give you time to consider what is best." With that, Chief Tahoma turned and mounted his horse. He didn't wait for an answer, leaving Jake alone in the quiet of the valley with his thoughts. Jake stood outside the cabin long after Chief Tahoma had left, the sounds of the quiet desert filling the air around him. The sun was beginning to dip lower, casting long shadows across the ground, and the wind had started to pick up, bringing with it the faint scent of sagebrush. But despite the stillness of the moment, Jake couldn't find peace. His mind was racing with the chief's words, his offer echoing in his thoughts. "I offer you my daughter Nahele in marriage." The words seemed to replay in Jake's mind like a distant echo, growing louder with each passing moment. He ran a hand through his dusty hair and shook his head, as if trying to clear away the confusion. Why would the chief offer such a thing? Was it out of gratitude for saving his son? Was it a cultural custom? Jake knew the Apache were a proud and honorable people, but this offer, It was beyond anything he had expected. Jake didn't believe in taking what wasn't given freely, and he certainly wasn't the type of man to accept such a personal gift without thought. But this was different. The chief wasn't just offering some trinket or a herd of cattle. He was offering something far more precious. His daughter. Jake felt a weight on his chest, the kind of weight that made it hard to breathe. What did this mean for him? What did it mean for Koa, the boy he had saved? And what about Nahele, the woman he had never met but who now seemed to loom large in his future? There were too many questions, too many unknowns. After a few moments of restless pacing, Jake turned back toward the cabin and entered. Inside, Koa was sitting by the fire, his hands wrapped around a small cup of water. The boy looked up when Jake entered, his eyes still clouded with uncertainty. It was clear that Koa was just as troubled as Jake, though neither of them had spoken of it aloud. "Are you okay?" Jake asked as he sat down across from the boy. Koa nodded slowly, but Jake could see the questions in his eyes, questions that mirrored his own. The boy had lived through much hardship, and now his life seemed to be tied to Jake in a way that neither of them could fully understand. "I don't know what to think," Koa admitted, his voice quiet. "Why did the chief offer you his daughter? It's not something we do lightly. It's an honor, but it's also a big responsibility." Jake leaned back, his fingers tapping the edge of the table. "I'm not sure either. But I can't just take something like that without understanding what it means. I wasn't trying to do anything to deserve such a reward. I was just trying to help you." Koa's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the word reward. It was clear that he had been raised with a deep respect for his father's position and traditions, but the reality of what his father had offered felt almost impossible to grasp. "I don't know what to do," Jake continued. "I didn't expect this, but I need to think about it," Koa nodded. "I think my father knows something about you, Jake. He knows what kind of man you are, and he believes you can be trusted. He thinks highly of you for saving my life, and he wants to repay you in the way that he knows best. But marriage, it's more than just a reward. It's an alliance. It means joining the tribe, becoming part of us." Jake sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His life as a cowboy had always been one of freedom. He didn't belong to anyone, and no one belonged to him. He had lived alone for so long, free to go wherever the wind took him. But this offer, it tied him to something, to someone. It would change everything. "I never thought of it that way," Jake finally said, his voice low. "I thought I was just doing what needed to be done. I didn't think I was earning anything. I don't want to be part of a tribe unless it's by choice, not because of some debt." Koa looked at him carefully, then said, "I understand. But my father doesn't think of it as a debt. He sees it as an honor. He doesn't expect you to join the tribe right away, but he wants you to understand that what he's offering isn't just a reward for what you did. It's a chance to become part of something bigger." Jake could feel the weight of the words settling over him. What Koa was saying made sense. This wasn't just about him. It was about something deeper, something tied to the Apache people's values and their way of life. But could he ever truly be part of that world? Could he step away from his life as a cowboy and become someone who belonged to a tribe? "I don't know if I'm the right man for that," Jake said, shaking his head. "I've always lived on my own. The cowboy life is all I've ever known. I'm not sure I could just walk into the Apache way of life and expect it to fit. I don't even know if I could offer Nahele what she deserves." Koa considered this for a long moment before speaking again. "You're wrong, Jake. The chief wouldn't offer his daughter to someone he didn't think was worthy. You saved my life, and that means something to him. He sees something in you. He doesn't expect you to change who you are, but he believes you can help us. We've been at war with the settlers for so long. We need allies, people who understand the land and the ways of outsiders, and you know both worlds." Jake stood up from his seat and walked to the window, looking out over the vast desert. The land stretched out endlessly before him, wild and untamed. He had always been drawn to it, always felt at home in its solitude. But now the idea of becoming part of something larger, something that could shape not only his future, but also Koa's and the future of the Apache people, weighed on him. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of that," Jake murmured, "but I'll think about it. I can't make a decision in a day." Koa nodded, his expression more hopeful now. "Take your time. But remember, this is about more than just you or me. It's about something bigger. The chief sees you as a man who can bring change, and I believe in you." Jake turned back to look at the boy. For the first time, he saw something different in Koa's eyes. Trust. The boy wasn't just grateful for his life being saved. He was putting his faith in Jake to help lead the way for the Apache people. The weight of that trust felt heavier than anything Jake had ever carried, but it also gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't known before. "I'll think on it, Koa," Jake said quietly. "I promise." The fire crackled softly in the hearth, the only sound filling the cabin as the two men sat in silence. Jake knew that the decision he was facing wasn't one he could take lightly. The Apache people were a proud and noble tribe, and if he chose to accept the chief's offer, his life would never be the same. But as the desert wind blew softly outside, Jake realized that sometimes the hardest decisions were the ones that could lead to the greatest change. Jake sat outside the cabin for hours, staring at the horizon where the last rays of the sun faded into the vast desert. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one tugging him in a different direction. The offer from Chief Tahoma weighed heavily on him, and the more he thought about it, the more uncertain he became. It wasn't just about accepting or rejecting an offer of marriage. It was about choosing between two completely different lives. He had lived alone in the wild frontier for years, always free to roam, to go wherever the wind took him. He was a cowboy through and through, a man who knew the land like the back of his hand, who had spent countless nights under the stars with nothing but his horse and his thoughts. The cowboy life was harsh, yes, but it was his life. He had carved it out for himself, far from the rules of society, far from any responsibilities. He liked it that way, but now everything was different. The Apache had their own ways, their own traditions, and if Jake accepted Chief Tahoma's offer, he would be bound to them in a way that was far beyond anything he had ever known. He would have to change, to adapt. His freedom, the one thing he had always taken for granted, would be lost. And not just for him if he accepted. He would be stepping into a life that involved not only Naheli but Koa, the tribe, and the way they lived. Jake's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats in the distance. He stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle, though he knew it was likely only Koa returning from a hunt or some errand. But the closer the sound came, the more Jake realized it wasn't Koa. The rider was too fast, too heavy-handed with the reins. He watched as a lone figure approached, the silhouette of a horse and rider framed against the fading light. As the figure drew closer, Jake could make out the shape of Naheli, the daughter of Chief Tahoma, riding toward him. Naheli's horse trotted to a halt in front of the cabin, and she swung herself off the saddle with graceful ease. Her dark eyes met Jake's, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The tension between them was palpable, though neither would admit it. Naheli was striking, tall, with long dark hair and a strong, confident presence. Yet despite her beauty, Jake could see the same uncertainty in her eyes that he had been feeling himself. Naheli didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "You've been thinking about my father's offer," she said, her voice steady, but with a hint of something softer beneath the surface. Jake nodded, but he didn't immediately reply. He had thought about little else since the chief's visit. It wasn't just the proposal that troubled him. It was the future. The thought of changing his entire life, becoming part of a world he didn't fully understand, felt like a heavy burden. "I didn't ask for any of this," Jake said quietly, his voice rough from the strain of his thoughts. "I saved Koa because he needed saving. I didn't think anyone owed me anything for it." Naheli looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. She didn't seem offended, but rather understanding, as if she had been prepared for his response. "I know," she said softly, "and my father knows that too. He doesn't offer you a reward because he feels he owes you. He offers you his daughter because he believes you have the strength to join our people, to help us to make things better." Jake's gaze shifted to the ground, the weight of her words settling over him. He wasn't sure what he had expected from Naheli, but it wasn't this calm acceptance. He thought that maybe if she had resisted, if she had shown anger at his hesitation, it would have been easier. But instead she stood there waiting for him to make his decision, offering him no judgment. "I don't know what to say," Jake muttered. "I've never lived a life like yours, Naheli. I've never had to think about what it means to be part of something bigger. I've always been on my own, a cowboy. I'm not sure I could just fit into your world." Naheli stepped closer, her expression serious but gentle. "I understand your fear," she said. "I've never lived a life like yours either. I have lived with my people in our traditions, but I don't know what it's like to live alone, without connection. I can't imagine the freedom you have, the independence. She paused, her dark eyes searching Jake's face. But that freedom comes with a cost, doesn't it? You're alone, Jake. You live your life in the wild without ties. You don't have the support of a family, a community. We do things together, everything we do is for the tribe. That's the Apache way. But I see you, Jake. I see the man who saved my brother's life, and I see a man who knows what it means to fight for what's right. That's something I believe in. Jake stared at her, his mind racing. Nahala was right. His freedom had come with a price. He had never known what it was like to have others depend on him, to have people to care for, people who cared about him. And now, he was faced with the possibility of becoming part of something much bigger than himself. He wasn't sure he was ready for that kind of responsibility. I don't know if I'm cut out for it, Jake said, almost to himself. This life isn't like yours, Nahala. I've spent years fighting to be free of the things that tie people down. I've avoided families, avoided commitments, and now your father wants me to take on something I'm not sure I can. Nahala stepped closer, her voice quieter now, more sincere. No one asks you to give up who you are, Jake. You don't have to stop being who you are. But you can choose to be part of something more. You can choose to help my people. There is much to be done. My father is an old man, and the tribe needs strength. If you are willing, you could help us bring peace to the land, to heal the wounds that have been created by years of fighting. You can help us build something stronger together. Jake's chest tightened as he listened to Nahala's words. What she said struck something deep within him. He had always been a man who worked alone, fought alone, but maybe, just maybe, he was ready for something more. Maybe there was a way to be part of something bigger, something that mattered. I don't know if I can do all that, Jake said softly, his eyes meeting hers, but I promise I'll think about it. I'll think long and hard about it. I can't make a decision right now. Nahala gave him a small, understanding smile. That's all I ask, Jake. Take your time. There is no rush. But remember, you have already done something great. You've saved my brother's life. That means more than you might realize. Jake stood there for a long time, his thoughts tangled in the possibilities. He had always prided himself on his independence, on his ability to survive in the wild on his own terms. But now Nahala had shown him a different way, one where he didn't have to be alone. It was a lot to take in, and he knew he couldn't make the decision in a single moment. As Nahala turned to leave, she paused and looked back at him one last time. Think carefully, Jake. Whatever you decide, my father and I will respect it. But remember this. Sometimes the greatest freedom comes not from running away from the world, but from stepping into it. With those final words, she rode off, leaving Jake standing alone once again, his heart heavy but filled with a new sense of possibility. Jake had always prided himself on his ability to think on his feet, to make decisions quickly in the heat of the moment. But this was different. This wasn't a matter of surviving the next day or getting out of a tricky situation. This was about changing his life, maybe forever. He had spent days weighing the choice, turning it over in his mind like a stone that wouldn't stop rolling. The chief's offer had left him unsettled, torn between the life he knew and the possibility of something new. It had been eating at him, pulling at him like the desert winds pulling the sand. The decision felt enormous. He had lived most of his life as a cowboy, free, wild, and unanchored. He had chosen the open plains, the quiet of the desert, over the company of others. He had never felt the need for a family or a tribe. He didn't need anyone, and he didn't want anyone depending on him. The idea of living in a community, being part of something larger, seemed both tempting and terrifying. But here he was, faced with a choice that would take him from everything he had known and pull him into a life he had never even imagined. Jake couldn't stop thinking about Nahala, about how calm and steady she had been when she spoke to him. She had been so sure of herself, so sure of what she wanted. There had been no hesitation in her words, no doubt. And that confidence had stirred something in him. A desire to understand what it would mean to truly be part of something, to be part of a people who had endured so much and yet stood strong. Nahala believed in him even when he didn't fully believe in himself. But it wasn't just Nahala who was pulling him in. It was Koa, too. The boy who had once been lost, who had been running for his life, was now part of something much bigger than himself. He had a family. He had a tribe. He had people who cared for him. Jake had saved Koa, But in doing so, he had opened a door to something new, not just for himself, but for the boy who would someday become a man. It was a strange thought, but Jake knew that in some way, his decision would shape Koa's future too. After another long day of thought, Jake saddled his horse and rode out. He didn't want to make his decision in the cabin surrounded by the same four walls. He needed to be outside, where the wind could carry his thoughts away. The desert stretched out before him, vast and quiet. As he rode, the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the land. The colors of the desert seemed to shift and change with every passing moment, and for a moment, Jake felt like he could see everything clearly, like the decision would come to him as naturally as breathing. But it didn't. The question still lingered. What did he really want? What was he willing to give up? Was it worth it to trade his freedom for a chance to help others? Would he be able to fit into the Apache way of life? Or would he always be an outsider? Would he be able to stand alongside Nahele, a woman who had known her place in the world her entire life, when Jake had spent so long trying to carve out his own? He didn't have answers to all of those questions, but one thing had become clear to him during these quiet days of reflection. The choice wasn't just about what he was giving up. It was about what he could gain. By joining the Apache, he wouldn't just be a man on his own anymore. He would be part of something much bigger. He would have a family, a tribe to belong to. He would have people who needed him, who depended on him. And that, he realized, was something he had never truly had before. The cowboy life had given him freedom, but it had also left him with loneliness. Being part of the Apache people wouldn't guarantee happiness or peace. It wouldn't be an easy life, but it would be a life with purpose, with connection, and with responsibility. Jake rode on, the quiet sound of hooves in the desert, the only noise around him. His thoughts were still swirling, but a sense of clarity began to settle over him. He couldn't deny that the life he had known was starting to feel like something he had outgrown. There was a pull in him now, a sense that maybe the time had come for him to build something new. When he finally returned to the cabin, the moon was high in the sky, casting a pale light over the land. Jake dismounted and went inside. Koa was sitting by the fire, his eyes glinting in the soft light. Nahele was there too, standing by the window, looking out at the desert. Jake looked at them both for a long moment. He could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air between them. Nahele didn't speak, but her eyes were steady, waiting for him to make the first move. Koa, on the other hand, was watching him closely, his expression eager, but patient. He had put his faith in Jake, and now it seemed as though he was ready to see what that faith would lead to. Jake took a deep breath, his heart beating a little faster than it should. He had made his decision. "I've thought about it long and hard," Jake began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "And I've decided I can't go back to the life I had. The cowboy life, it's been good to me, but I've realized it's not enough anymore. I've seen what you have here, what your people have, and I think I'm ready to be part of that. I'm ready to step into your world to help you however I can." Nahele's eyes softened, and for the first time a smile spread across her face. It wasn't a wide smile, but it was enough to make Jake's heart skip. Koa's face lit up with joy, and he immediately stood up, walking toward Jake with a newfound respect. "You've made the right choice," Koa said, his voice full of pride. "You'll be part of the tribe now, just like my father always said you would be. You've shown more than just strength, Jake. You've shown heart." Jake smiled, feeling the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, but he knew that he wasn't alone anymore. He had chosen a path, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was walking toward something meaningful. Nahele stepped forward, her eyes meeting his. "It's not going to be easy," she said quietly, her tone serious but full of warmth. "But we'll do it together." Jake nodded. "Together," he echoed, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. He wasn't just a cowboy anymore. He was part of something bigger. He was part of a family, a tribe, and he was ready to help them build a future. As the three of them stood together by the fire, the desert outside quiet and still, Jake felt a sense of peace. The journey ahead would be challenging, but he was no longer afraid. He had found a place to belong, and for the first time in his life he was ready to be part of something that would last.